Welcome to the Destinations with Doni podcast, where we explore your cultural passions. Destination home, cuisine, community, relationships, and passion. Embrace your cultural identity as we bring you the tools to live in full color. Welcome to the Destinations with Doni podcast, where we explore your cultural passions so you can live in full color. Today, I'm so excited to welcome Megan Norton. She is an author. She is a podcaster. She is a researcher. Wait till you hear about her background. But more than anything, Megan is multicultural, a third culture kid, military brat, international business kid, missionary kid. Oh my gosh. And of course, a third culture adult, because who's a third culture kid that can't be a third culture adult? And multi-ethnic. So we'll talk a little bit about that. What I love about those particular things is rarely do I get to meet someone who has as many cultural dimensions as I do. And Megan is up there. So that adds a lot of complexity to your personality, to understanding, and to belonging. So we'll get into that. But to introduce Megan, she's a third culture kid author, consultant, and researcher focused on supporting cross-cultural individuals, as we do. We know we love this industry. We love this place of being. Growing up as a U.S. diplomat dependent, she lived in 6 countries and has lived in 4 more as an adult third culture kid. Megan is the podcast host of A Culture Story, director of a nonprofit for TCKs, or Third Culture Kids, and a writer at adultthirdculturekid.com. Her book, Belonging Beyond Borders, How Adult Third Culture Kids Can Cultivate a Sense of Belonging, equips and empowers globally mobile youth to recognize their cultural competencies and apply them in various contexts. So, Megan, wow.
Hi, Doni.
And thanks for being here. I'm so excited to explore all of these things.
Thank you for having me, and I am so happy to explore these things with you. I love the work that you do and the energy you have in this world.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. You know, these interviews and I'm sure, well, I shouldn't say I'm sure, I'll ask you if you feel this way, but I assume you do feel this way. Being around people who are more like you than the world that you have to swim in every day, gosh, it makes such a difference. It really helps prop you up. And the work is hard and sometimes can be lonely, but then when we get to interact one-on-one, it's all worth it.
Yes, I couldn't agree more.
Yes, 1,000%. I was just saying to my team on Wednesday, you know, Deanna, who's our art director, who actually is in with the team when we do the podcast, and Katie is our producer. Katie wasn't in this meeting, but I was saying to our core team, you know, not everybody gets to experience what I get to experience every day. Deanna got to be in our clubhouse rooms. I can't remember. I don't think you ever were in any of those. Were you, Megan?
No, not yet.
When we used to, during the pandemic, when everybody was on Clubhouse, we would have thousands of people come through our rooms, thousands of TCKs, thousands of multicultural people, every single time, thousands of people. And Deanna was lucky enough to see and feel that energy from our audience, because I'm one of the few that gets to experience that on a regular basis. I mean, everyone else is working behind the scenes. They don't get to travel and meet people one-on-one. So here in the podcast is another way we get to do that. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So let's get into it. I can't wait to hear more about your book. So tell us about your background. You have all these cultural dimensions. Tell us about this.
Thanks. Well, to begin at the beginning, I was born into the expat life, globally mobile life, with my parents' career being in diplomacy. And so, as you mentioned before, lived in 6 countries by the time I was 18, and went to international schools, but also really got involved in local community organizations. That was a high priority, a high value in my family, to really take take advantage of where we were locally. And then, as an adult TCK, continued the trek of living abroad outside of my passport country, which is the US, and now just really thrive and love and have such a mission to bring additional cross-cultural understanding to people who have the globally mobile experiences like I've had.
Yes. Wonderful, wonderful. I love that. So, how has that informed your journey? I can only imagine the answer you're going to have to this book, to the website, writing for the website, to your podcast. What made you want to be in this field?
Mm-hmm. Great question. It's been an ongoing journey. It's been a process, and I think the root of it was that I wanted to have people um, have as many opportunities to tell their story in as many ways as they wanted to and could. So one of the gifts that I was given, through my traveling, through my upbringing, through my education, is more language to tell your story, to describe your experiences. And in the book, I'll hold it up right now. Here it is, Belonging Beyond Borders. Um, I have a lot of self-reflection questions in there, a lot of exercises, because I believe that belonging and identity and telling your story needs to be complex. It needs to have that dimension. And so I invite readers to co-author and to populate in the book their own story of who they are, where they belong, and where they're going. I also love to write, as you mentioned, on my platform, Adult Third Culture Kid, about these stories of what does it mean? What does it mean to tell your story? And I believe that foundationally, a story is not complete until it is told, heard, and understood.
Told, heard, and understood. Wow, that's pretty powerful. So, I love that this is about belonging. As you know, the mission for cultures is belonging as well. And we want people to embrace their in between cultural identity because everyone should feel like they matter. So, how do you get to that understanding? So, told, heard, and understood. First of all, how do you get to true hearing?
Hmm.
Because a lot of times you tell your story and people listen, or yeah, I would say they listen and they don't necessarily hear. And if you don't hear it, if you don't see the person, truly see them, then you can't necessarily understand. So how do you get through that whole thread?
Yes. Yeah. There's an entire section, or actually multiple points in the book, where I talk about active listening and the point of um, listening is that intentionality of wanting to be heard as deeply as you hear others. And so it's a learned skill. It takes
Mm,
practice to hear. Um,
mm,
and in that thread of telling your story, it's first creating the space, having the space, feeling safe enough to tell your story. Part of the journey of working with third culture kids and um, with equipping them with advice of, okay, how do you tell your story? Sometimes you don't, upon meeting somebody, immediately go through, oh, I grew up here, 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 or, this is my life story, my history, my ethnicity, all of this. It can be overwhelming for a listener. It can potentially shut down a conversation because people, don't know at what point to connect or to follow up with. And so um, having that social wisdom, that pre-thinking of
mm.
how am I going to present my story and share it and protect it also, because we don't necessarily want to tell our entire story and then not not feel any connection with our listeners, with our community.
Wow, such powerful messages. So, okay. First, you talk about safety, feeling safe enough to tell a story. It's interesting because I mean, people probably know by now. A lot of people still don't believe it, but I'm an introvert. And I think I have extroverted qualities, right? Like I can be gregarious, I can be outgoing, but when my energy runs out, like there's a fine line. I'm here or I'm here. There's not much in between, right? And and so people mistake that for being outgoing or for wanting to be in front or for wanting to be on camera or uh, exposed, whatever the case may be. And so that whole point of feeling safe enough to tell your story, a lot of people don't understand how much energy it takes and how much bravery, courage it takes to take what is really important to you from inside and put it out into the world for people to stomp on it if they feel like, right? So
Yes.
that safety is
Yes.
huge. And then you talk about the social wisdom. Okay, is my story safe here? Am I safe here?
Mhm.
Do I want to tell this story at this time? I've had times where people have been like, oh, I was surprised you didn't say X, Y, or Z. But that's where the empathy comes in, or not empathy, but the EQ, what is the word for that? Emotional
Emotional
quotient.
intelligence.
Yeah, emotional intelligence. Thank you. Where it's like, you know what? I'm not necessarily safe in this moment, so let me just keep that part to myself. How do you teach that? How do you teach people to protect their story in those moments?
Mm-hmm. It well, it depends. It depends on so many different factors, right? Of who you're with, how much time do you have with the person, what's the intention of the conversation. So, really understanding those dynamics, first of all. But also, I love to also say it takes time to tell your story, and
Mm,
um, giving yourself that grace, giving other people that grace as well. When you just mentioned that some people are like, why didn't you bring that up? Or why didn't you say that? Um, because you are exercising, what's the most salient part of my identity do I want to talk about in this situation? What's relevant? Some people say that when or third culture kids, when they're telling their stories, sometimes they're bragging, but it's
yeah.
it's that reality that they're sharing. And
Yes.
so, as a very concrete example, sometimes when third culture kids are going to university and everybody is making friends freshman year, everybody's in that same situation of vulnerability of, are people going to like me, or are people going to accept me, or how do I make friends in this new context? um, Sometimes I'll say to third culture kids, don't when you're telling your stories, don't necessarily say the location of maybe where you went skiing, or maybe where you went for a holiday. But yeah, you laid on the beach. Maybe you don't want to say which beach, but I like to go to the beach,
Yes.
because it's that location factor that can shut down the conversation. But you're telling who you are. You're saying what you like. You like to ski, things like that.
Yes.
So again, the priority of what are you trying to communicate, and how are you trying to connect with people around you?
I taught a class on this at university for about 10 years. And one of my first university students, I'll never forget, she was a third culture kid who grew up very often in Malaysia. And most of it was in Asia, but she had a US passport. And she was not Asian. And she could not believe when we met because she told the story, and instantly I understood and laughed, and you could see her eyes open up. It's like, what is this? Like, who are you? So the story was that her mother was in a store in a small town in the United States and had on, I don't know, like let's say a Van Halen t-shirt, a rock band t-shirt from the 80s or something like this. And the story's from the early 2000s. And someone said to her, "Oh, do you like this band?" And the mother said, oh no, I just picked it up in this little store in the south of France, and then it went on to tell the story. Now the person shut down at that point. They weren't listening. The mother was very confused. And and the daughter is telling me the story. And instantly I just started nodding my head. I knew exactly what had happened. And her eyes opened up very widely because she saw that I knew, which the point of the story was she was just saying basically she got the shirt at a store, telling you where the store was, as anyone would. If this were a store down the street, you wouldn't have stopped listening to the story. But because I said the store was in the south of France, which the mother thought was relevant because the store isn't here, you're going to ask me where the store is. I'm telling you, this is where I got it, right?
Yeah.
Just as if you told me, oh, I got it at the store down the street. I'm like, oh, okay. But now the conversation, no more, done. This person now thinks you're elitist. Why did you have to tell me that? I didn't have to know. But a big part of it is, and this is what I tried to teach in class, which is very difficult to do, think outside of yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you're thinking from your own experience, you're thinking, oh, well, this person is bragging because why would you tell me that? Because travel, or maybe to go to the south of France, is something that is something you dream about or wish or want to do. Who knows what the case may be? Just, I might want to be a NASCAR driver, right? But if someone's a NASCAR driver, I'm enamored when I meet that person. I don't think they're bragging to me when they tell me, oh yeah, I drive this car 100 and some miles an hour.
Yeah.
And so when we're looking from our own lens is where I think some of that judgment comes in. And so I love that tip. I never thought of that. Don't give the location.
Yeah.
Now, what other tips do you have in the book? Or is everything in it as grounding as that?
Oh, thank you. Well, I do like to um, make sure that I say it's practical. I want to make sure it's not so theoretical. I do say that a lot of the framework came from my studies in intercultural communication, but taking those concepts and then making it accessible and relatable to readers. In the book, I also use a imagery of a garden and weave that through of how your sense of belonging really takes time. It takes uh, it takes nutrients from those around you, from even maybe a gardener or nurturer, and so I use uh, that allegory and imagery in there so that people can have a piece of, okay, I don't have to belong immediately or in every context. It takes time, it takes patience, it takes effort.
And how do we get people to make that effort? If they don't think, if they have the image that you think you're better than they are, or you're trying to assert the things that you've done, or you're bragging, as you say, how do we get them to make that effort?
Yeah, that's going back to what you're saying of getting outside of yourself. I also would add to that of first heightening your self-awareness of who you are, and having that self-awareness, then you can more maybe seamlessly say, okay, I'm going to pull back here, or I'll contribute here. One of the chapters in the book is about belonging is giving and receiving, and that both and of, you first need to know what you can offer the world before you can give it. And so it looks at, what are your skills, talents, who are you dimensionally. I also mentioned in the book, how do you describe who you are without saying you're a third culture kid? Because saying you're a third culture kid, it says you had an experience. I had an experience of growing up cross-culturally, or outside of my passport country, or outside of the cultures of my parents. And yet, what does that say about me? Do I have that cultural empathy? Do I have the ability to switch perspectives? Do I have cultural sensitivity? Um, so, so again, giving the language, equipping people with how do you describe who you are, and then what can you give to the world? That that's the initial effort you need to make of who am I and how do I show up in the world.
I love this concept of belonging is giving and receiving. So when you say that, so, instead of describing yourself as a third culture kid, do you mean the actual words, I'm a third culture kid?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, got it. That's interesting because I feel actually it's so much more. I mean, I've been doing this work for 2 decades now, and it's so much more prevalent. So many people understand. I'm always shocked when they understand. Oh, you know what that is, right? So that's not necessarily a way I introduce myself. I have a description. Uh, People usually ask, "Oh, where'd you grow up?" And I say I grew up globally. Often, and I say that on purpose because often that'll shut down the conversation. They don't even know what that means. They just like, what are you talking about? But sometimes, and when people really want to listen, to your point, they'll say, "Oh, what does that mean?" Or tell me more about that, whatever the case may be. And then I do another probe just to make sure they really want to hear. Because if you don't want to hear, we're not going into it.
Yes.
Right. So that's interesting to think that someone would say, I'm a third culture kid. Is that something you find for the younger generation? Because it's more prevalent for this younger generation.
Yes. Yeah. In some of the sectors or communities I work with, the term third culture kid is widely used or widely known, and so when they are coming back to their passport country or to a community in which they're going to be moving to, they'll say, "Oh, I'm a third culture kid," and um, so either they're using that as a way of maybe confirming like I can't belong here because I'm a third culture kid, or as a way of saying this is my difference from you,
Mhm.
and wanting to be um, showcasing that difference right off the bat of having a different experience.
Now, what would your advice to be to someone going back to that switching perspectives? What would your advice be on how they can cultivate that, how they can think outside of themselves, how they can have more empathy and be able to switch and not maybe be so introspective?
Mm-hmm. Well, I have an exercise in the book called Identity Orbit. And with this exercise, again, it's a very practical self reflection exercise of um, writing down, reflecting on what makes me me. And it can be traditions, it can be food preferences, can be sports or hobbies. And in this exercise particularly, it also looks at what used to be part of my identity. So for example, if I lived in a different country growing up, maybe a certain tradition or holiday was celebrated, but now in my current context or country, I don't celebrate it. And so looking at all of that on paper, you can say, oh, I have multiple ways I am able to connect with people. Maybe not similar, or maybe not what it looks like in this season of life, as it does in a different season of life. But when you come across somebody in your community who, maybe speaks the language that you used to study or speak as a child, that comes back immediately into your identity orbit, as I say, swing back into who you are. And so it's a gift of the both and. That's where um, the both and of knowing like, okay, I don't have to show up in the world as I did, in this season of life or at that age, but knowing that if somebody comes across, in my social circle or work, that I can connect to, it's something that you have as a gift, and as a skill, as a TCK, to say like, oh, I can relate to you. Let me tell you how I relate to you. Um, so it's just uh, playing with that idea that of how do I show up with my identity, not necessarily saying the differences, but also the shared commonalities you can with somebody in your path.
Yes, 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 very much so. I love that, the gift of both and so you're when you learn, I guess, your identity orbit, who you are, what do you say to those people? Or I should ask, have you ever had the experience, or have any of your students or those that you work with had the experience of people saying, "Oh no, that's not who you are. You're this person." Do you see that? I see you nodding. So,
Yes, I something that's coming up for me is a story of when either the nuclear family or extended family don't validate or say, no, why do you
mm,
have this on your identity orbit? That's not who we are as a family, or that's not part of our culture. Um, and so that can be very hurtful for an individual, right? When they're putting something on their reflection and who describing who they are, um, and not having that permission from people who love them or they live with, say like, no, that's not who you are. um, I think of families who have perhaps multiple children, and the children have different experiences in different countries. And so the older child might have a language or a certain tradition on their identity orbit, and their younger sibling has no clue what they're talking about. So even within the same
mhm.
family, having those different histories, but giving permission, and from family and extended family, when you go back maybe to visit your passport country, just, you know, again, having that wisdom of, do I share this piece of me, but also maybe educating and saying, you don't know this part of my identity and my history, but I am putting this as who I am, and please recognize that.
That's so important because in my own family, and when I was doing my PhD studies, I really was delving into
Mm.
multidimensionality in family. In my family,
Mhm.
actually, I didn't even realize that my parents were TCKs until I sat down and did this, and I thought, and so many blocks now fell into to place. I saw them completely differently, and I had so much more grace for them. Okay, my parents aren't crazy, but I also did something for me. It kind of, oh, I wonder if people see me that way. I mean, they were my parents, and I understood them. I understood that they had come to the United States from somewhere else, but I didn't really look at the fact of whether they were TCKs or not. Right? It never occurred to me until I actually sat down and did this exercise for my family. So again, one, it helped change the way I looked at them, but it also changed and helped me understand how other people may see me,
Mm.
right? um but as you say, every single sibling, every single child in my family has a different experience, and I first realized that when my brother identified as a military brat, and I was like, what are you talking about, right? And I identify as a global nomad TCK. So he's speaking as if we were military brats didn't make any sense to me until I really sat and thought through his experience, even though we're only 2.5 years apart, right? And then our younger brothers have a completely different experience than we are. So all of those dynamics are just within the family, let alone going out and experiencing the world,
Yes.
right? So what's interesting about what you're saying about the nuclear family, I think a difference, and I think what is not spoken about a lot is for people of color in the TCK realm. and how that is, because you also have now an additional tribe of people who are like family, who may tell you that you're not what you're saying you are,
Mm-hmm.
right? Oh, that's not really, no, that's not, you're like this. And you're like, wait a second, I think I know me. I live with me 24/7,
Yes.
right? No, that's not who you are. Do you ever see something like that outside of the nuclear family?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a important dimension and added complexity. Um, I would say I see that sometimes with one sector I work with are missionary kids, and missionary kids who are, the family goes all parts of different parts of the world, all different parts of socioeconomic situations too. And so I would say I have this conversation a lot when missionary kids are coming back to the U.S., their passport country, and grappling with what what does it mean to be in a certain socioeconomic class. Um, there's so much difference, and thinking about how to talk about that in your classes at university. How do you talk about that in your dorm, in your residence hall, when you have seen so much diversity in socioeconomic status and what is privilege? And I would say also I have the conversation coming as a diplomat TCK, talking with missionary kids and them saying, "Oh, you were the privileged TCK." So there's so much conversation happening, and I want the conversation to continue to happen. That's where we can really bring more understanding to story when we talk about what lens are you looking at it through.
Well, I find that interesting. I love how you said, "Oh, well, you were the privileged TCK," because I do think that monocultural people see all TCKs as privileged,
Yes,
and that's not necessarily the case.
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's really interesting to come from that lens and have, especially if you weren't one of the privileged, to have people see that, because again, from their lens, I've never left my street, my state, my county, whatever the case may be. In the case of the U.S. or anywhere, my nation. So since you've left your nation, you have a privilege that I haven't had. But often that privilege may come with strife, right? And that I think is something that all TCKs need to overcome. Even privileged TCKs who had that privileged upbringing, and they think about TCKs as a whole, and how do we work with this population? They're only looking from their privileged lens and not realizing there are other TCK experiences.
Mhm. Yes. Yes. And that's again the self-reflection questions I have in the book, right? I even bring up, how does this change with cultural contexts, different cultural
Mm-hmm.
contexts? So really trying to dimensionalize those different perspectives.
Well, I love this. This has been a pleasure. I love the whole identity orbit, the exercises that you've described. It sounds very helpful. I can't wait to describe the book for people. Where can they find, or to expose people to the book? Where can they find it?
Currently, it is being sold on Amazon in Kindle and paperback versions.
Okay, and we'll put a link when we put the description to this episode. Thank you so much, Megan. It's been such a pleasure. I'm glad that we got a chance to talk about this.
Doni, so great to talk with you, connect with you. I love these kinds of conversations, so thank you for the opportunity.
I do as well, and I love your work. I hope that you continue to live in full color.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening or watching Destinations with Doni. Show your support by rating this episode on your podcast platform, wherever you listen to your podcast. And while you're there, make sure to subscribe to get notifications of new episodes, because you don't want to ever ever miss out on any of this cross-cultural goodness.